Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut, for a new episode. We've done these in the past when we're learning a Masechta, pick a sefer or a character to focus on. And this time, the episode is going to be about Nazir's Shimshon, the controversy of 1513. I don't know much about it, so I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. But I got back from Eretz Yisrael last week, and I had the opportunity to visit Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut's studio where he records these episodes from. So many people weren't sure if that's a fake background, but as we were shown, this is the real deal. It's the real thing. And Rabbi Dr. Brut doesn't only have Sfarim in the studio here, he rents many warehouses around Eretz Yisrael to keep the rest of his Sfarim in. Not many, a bit of an exaggeration, but at other places where he has Sfarim as well. Many people have reached out offering physical help, perhaps psychological help, dealing, with your connection to your Svarim. Some people suggest it's an addiction. So if you want to address that publicly, I'm giving you the floor right now.
I can't deny that it's an addiction. That much I could say.
Okay,
But I'm not seeking. But I'm definitely not seeking a cure at this time.
So all the mental health professionals who deal with addictions, please stay far away.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll listen to the shiurim, but we're not offering a cure.
Okay.
I'm assuming this will be something interesting, different than other things that we've done in the past. And just we're looking forward as well. Nazir is finishing, Saita starting. We hope to be able to put out an episode on Saita. The time of year we're recording this is right before Pesach, and hopefully we'll have something interesting related to Pesach as well. So, Rabbi Brut, as we always start with, how are you today? And take it away.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. It's already late in the evening, on my end over here. Okay, so basically, this is simply a topic that I stumbled upon. I have not collected upon information about this ever before, not on purpose. I was looking for halacha l'maisa sugya for Nazir, and I started noticing the sugya kept on creeping up. The starting point is it's relevant, and Nazir Shimshon. The question is, if it's relevant, why don't we find anywhere in Shulchan Aruch about it? Now, for years I was aware when we say Hataras Nadarim Erev Rosh Hashanah, people talk about, do you say Nazir Shimshon in it? Not saying Nazir Shimshon, could he be Mater Neder for Nazir Shimshon? And there's a lot of discussion about that, but we're not going to discuss that today. Now, in recent years, I've spent a lot of my time trying to attempt on mapping out the world of halacha in Poland and Ashkenaz. Originally, I started from the Magen Avram's time, and then I started moving backwards, the Ramah, the Marshal, and even more backwards, to Rosh Shalom Shachni, further back, Rabbi Yaakov Polak, and even further back to the Maril and his contemporaries. At the same time, there's another world that's going on is the Sephardi world, and which also relates very much to this. The Beis Yosef, author of the Shulchan Aruch, what was going on in his world before he came onto the scene, and he ends up producing the masterpiece, the Beis Yosef, and then the Shulchan Aruch and Sfarad. So I was always very curious about that. And this today is a small little start of this topic. It was a great controversy at the time, very relevant then. It helps us get a glimpse into that Torah world, into the key players, their methods, and much more. I'm not going to go into every single aspect over here. This could take hours and hours, and all the side topics that are all relevant to this, just to give a small taste of it as it relates to Nazir. Now, perhaps later on, a different date, maybe I'll return to much more about the different people that we're going to mention briefly going through over here. One more introduction for this is as follows. Today, we take it for granted. We have many areas of halacha. When a question comes up, one opens up the Shulchan Aruch, you seek out the various mafarshim, the sugyas, and we have the information about the said topic, and you reach a psak. When a new Metzias kind of question comes up, then the Gedolim have to scramble. They have to understand the Metzias. Mashal, years ago when electricity was just invented, it wasn't an open Shulchan Aruch, so there was a whole different ballpark how the Gedolim had to deal with it. This topic of Nazir Shimshon is very unique. Why? Nazir, as we spoke about in the earlier shir about Nazir in the introduction of Masechta, it wasn't really learned. There's come out no Rishayim on Masechta Nazir, and it's not in Shulchan Aruch. Now, not only that, in the times of Rishonim, it seems that no one ever said, I'm going to be a Nazir Shimshon," even though technically he could technically say, "I could be a Nazir Shimshon." So so there's no precedent in the world of halacha. Not only that, in this period of time, 1513, there's no Shulchan Aruch, and as we know, there's no Shulchan. It's not even in Shulchan Aruch, even if it existed. So it's interesting to see when all of a sudden the topic comes up, and we'll see what the story was. All of a sudden, the Gedolim have to come up with a solution, and they have to learn the sugyas. And basically, Nazir, Masechtas Nazir, becomes halacha lemaisa at this period of time in the 1500s. Now, what's even more interesting is that just it's not like just after this story that we'll be discussing today a little bit about, literally dozens of chuvas are written about cases of Nazir Shimshon. That people use this, it became like a standard type of sprach, an expression that people said, a shvua, if you don't do this and this and this, I'm going to take upon myself to be a Nazir Shimshon. It seems like it caused the whole, it might have been this story caused influence, it's unclear, but definitely we see in shuva literature from the world of Svarad at the time, dozens of sources about this. And even today we don't even know what's the story, what happened. Like all of a sudden it comes on the scene, so to speak. In Rishayim time, no one's saying it. This period of time, people are saying it, and then afterwards, it's very not common, and there's no good answer for it. But a fellow, his name is Shmuel. Shmuel, hold on. Let me see if I can find Shmuel Morel, I believe his name is. He has a whole article where he documents in 1988. He documents a collection of many different chuvas that talk about it. He has an article. It's called "Samson Nazirite Vow in the 16th Century." And he basically collects, he says, the responsa emanating from the Ottoman lands of the 16th century give evidence of widespread use of an oath which invoked the name of Samson the Nazirite. And then he goes and collects it. Now, interestingly enough, this is 1988, so he probably started this article well before 1988. He gives Hakaras HaTov to the Bar Ilan Responsa. Now, at that time, in 1988, Bar Ilan Responsa is not what it is today. For example, today I just was curious. I searched on Bar Ilan Responsa, and you get much more chuvas about it. And forget about it. If one goes on Eitzah Chachma, you probably even find more. But as as I'm going to show today, there's even new chuvas that came out in the past few months that are also new manuscripts from that period of time. That means the Dar of the Beis Yosef and right before, also on this controversy, and even talking about other cases in Nazir Shimshon. So it seems this became like a hot topic for a certain period of time, and then it dies down. Okay, now, as I always like to mention, what's the sources that I used in preparing this? So first of all, first and foremost is there was a Yid Chaim Dimitrovsky, who originally learned in Eitz Chaim, is a Yerushalmi Yid. He has an interesting life story, not for now, but basically anytime he wrote an article about a subject, the various articles he wrote, they're incredible. He was a Yid holding in Mamish in the Sugyas and learning, and also in the history. So one of the Sugyas that somehow caught his interest was this topic. I'd be more than happy to share it if someone emails me and wants to see this article. I'm not attempting to say over that whole article and all the information over there, but this is a incredible article, sheds much light. Maybe one day we'll get to more aspects of this article. He has other articles which we'll also refer to. Another thing is this Morel article we mentioned, and two other people, contemporaries, Rabbi Yitzchak Yeshaya Weiss, who in the journal Tzvunot, which was famous in the 1990s, he had an article about this topic a little bit, and then he also made a major discovery relating to this, which we'll discuss, and Professor Shlomo Zalman Hevlin in various articles also did this. They're printed in his certain art in various issues of Yeshurun, and now in his volume of collected writings that's about to be released. There's also a professor, Avram David, who worked a lot on this Tkufa and the people over here, and he has various articles about some of the people that we're going to mention today and different things. And two other sources is one, Professor Meir Ben-Yo also has valuable information as an expert of this Tkufa. And last but not least, I recently was just in America, and I visited Mechon Mishnah Sarbaran, in Lakewood, where they work on, amongst other projects, besides Baron Cutler, Schneider Cutler's writings, they also work on various other projects. I met with Rabbi Tzvi Rapberg, and while talking to him, he mentioned the project that they're working on, supposedly supposed to come to him very soon. It's called the Chuvas of the Zaken Aaron Uvnei Dairoi, a massive few volumes about the topic. I mentioned something that I'm about to give a shir about Nazir Shimshon. He says, "Oh, there's in here," and there was, and he showed me the work, and he was kindly enough to allow me to see some of the work on this topic that they have in this material, some new materials on the topic also that they also discovered in their work. Anyway, that is the general introductions, which some people don't like, but sorry, we have to say them anyway. Now let's get let's start getting to the main point. Okay, so first of all, it's not in Shulchan Aruch. So if you look in the Shach in Siman Reish Lamed Tes, he talks about if Nazirus is Nageya, and then he says a funny line at the end. He says, "V'ayim v'tshuvas achroinim, kam v'tshuvas bedinin Nazirus Nazir Shimshon." There's a bunch of tshuvas, so it sounds very interesting. Why is it that the Shach is telling us this? Now, Shach, we know today, was expert in chuvas of the Sephardi world, but he doesn't talk about it, he doesn't handle it, he doesn't even mention anything about it, but he says there's a lot of chuvas. Usually, chuva literature, as a rule, although there are always exceptions to the rule, means it was nageya, it was actual question. So you would think that the Shach and Isaac Haley would at least have a comment about it. Anyway, he doesn't. The Piskei Tshuva talks more about this. And the Piskei Tshuva actually mentions about Hataras Nadarim, the question we said, tying this story in. Anyway, the first mention of collecting chuvas relating to the topic was Erech Lechem, which today can be found in your standard Mechon Yerushalayim edition of Shulchan Aruch, and there's a bunch of chuvas about the topic. Okay, but the bottom line is there's no discussion in Shulchan Aruch. What happened? And why? And what's this cryptic line that the Shach is referring to, that there's a bunch of chuvas achreidim and whatever? So obviously this continued to spark my curiosity. Now, as I mentioned already, there's no, as far as we know today, there's no mention in the times of something happening that was Nazir or Shimshon was invoked, so to speak, in the times of Rishayim. Now, just to fast forward, you might this is a little further stretch of this question, because I'm talking specifically about Nazir Shimshon. But recently I came across, and I heard this also from other people, and I'm quoting now from a news site. This is current news about Lakewood in 2016. It seems a Rebbe gave a shiur about Hilchos Naziris. At the end of the lesson, two 12-year-old boys got up and declared that they accepted upon themselves the dinim of being a Nazir. He was so taken aback, he brought the attention to the Manal, local Paiskim. They were not yet bar mitzvah. It's a tough sugya. They was brought to Shmuel Kamenetsky, and Shmuel Kamenetsky issued a psak, whatever he issued. So, but this was a case of two people. They really didn't know what they were doing necessarily. They heard a shiur about it, and it sounded exciting to them, but they were not gedolim, and they decided to be a Nazir. But this is a little different. This is Nazir Shimshon. Now, even because we're concluding the limit of Daf Yomi right now with Masechta with Nazir Shimshon, so Nazir Shimshon is a little different. We know you can't be a Nazir today, but what about being Nazir Shimshon? So interestingly enough, there are people today in Yerushalayim that are, I guess you could call it, they practice being Nazir. There's one that is a famous guy, or I think his name is Rav Turgeman or something like that. He prints a lot of Kisvei Yad of Kabbalah Svarim. There's some others. One of these people wrote a sefer called Nazir Elohim, a whole arichos about Nazir Bazman Hazeh. Anyway, so if you look, Lamashal the Minchas Chinuch, which he sums it up based on the Gemaras, which we'll see very quickly soon, that there's a type of Nazir, it's called Nazir Shimshon. And basically the Isurim on this Nazir is shaving and wine. But he could be mitamata mace, it seems. So therefore, it's possible that you could be a Nazir Shimshon. So technically, if someone said for whatever reason he wants to be a Nazir Shimshon, he'll be able to. Anyway, now let's get to our story. The years that we're referring to about this controversy happens in about 1513 in Mitzrayim. But it spreads after the question was brought up and the story is brought up. It ends up being spread to Yerushalayim and all the neighboring lands. Different people got chuvas about it, and we'll hear some of the people involved. But first it was like this. Was it common? So, up till now, I keep on saying that it wasn't common. Before 1513, and as I said, I quoted this guy's article, he shows then it seems to be common. But interestingly enough, one of the key players in this sugya was a Yid, which we're going to hear about, Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv. So he throws out a lashon in his discussion on the sugya, where he's actually talking about the 1513 story, and he sounds like that we hear Shamati that in Mitzrayim ki minig sugar pi befi hakol ki b'chol eis asher yichafetz echo mehem laser iser sheyikayim ladi b'li hatara. He will say Omer imani esek kach hareini Nazir k'Shimshon v'achrei dvarav lo yishanu ken kayam legami lois b'first matzeish Nazir Shimshon gakaydim ein lo hatara. So B'kitzer, they use it sort of as a very tough threat to get whatever it is that they want. So be that as it may, it seems to be happening in this time frame because we don't have any stories of it happening early. Anyway, back to 1513, we have these documentation Simcha Asaf discovered about some type of din Torah. There was a guy, Rabbi Avram, seemed to be a chashuv person, and there was a Yid, Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul, and he made up as a shvua with the threat of, if you don't listen to me, Nazir Shimshon, this whole thing, and seems that they wanted to be matir it afterwards. Now, we don't have a lot of details about what was going on in the case. It's fragmented, the document. Dimitrovsky, in his article, he talks about it. He tries to explain a little bit what he's able to try to figure out from it. Bottom line is, the person involved was a Yid, Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul. Now, those that learned in Brisk or are familiar with the Zichar Moshe neighborhood know there's a street right over there called Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul. Turns out that he was the person that was the one who made the shvua. Now, signing on this document was another great person, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, the Mari Beirav. He was on the Bezdin, and we have some documents in this story. There's some documents about what was going on, and as I said, we're not going to go into this story, but this is just the beginning. Fast forward a few months, it seems, and we find the same Rabbi Yitzchak swearing yet again with a Nazir Shimshon, and we're going to see more what that swearing was, what that story was in a second. Now, and then, all of a sudden, whatever happened, I guess he made up as a shvua, which we'll see what it was about, and then it didn't work out, so they needed to find a way to be matir it, that he shouldn't end up being a Nazir Shimshon. So they needed to seek a solution, and that's what ended up happening, that this was discussed by various Gedolim. It seems some people were pro the solution that was discovered, others were not, and that's what part of the rest of this presentation is going to be about. Basically like this. Let's start a second with a drop of background. We have this Yid. His name is Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul. So yes, in Eretz Yisrael they name streets after all different types of people. Anyone familiar with the streets in Eretz Yisrael? But it turns out this Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul was a tremendous, tremendous Adam Gadol. Now we could spend at least an hour talking about this Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul, but to understand in plain, simple English is there are times in history that at that time in history there's a key player. This Yid, Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul, was a key player in everything going on in Mitzrayim and Yerushalayim, in the Torah world, everything. He was a dayan, and he seemed to be also a rich person. He literally was involved with everything. Not just that he was a askin, so to speak, he was also a learned askin. He ran a Bezdin, he ended up supporting yeshivas, and just to see from someone in that period of time that saw him l'chayra, who was from Italy, his name was Ramesha Basilo, who visited Eretz Yisrael in this period of time, he says like this: one of the prominent men in Jerusalem, the foremost, is the Nugget, our honorable teacher. I'm reading an English translation of the Hebrew. Our honorable teacher, Rabbi Isaac Shaul, who is crowned with the crown of the Torah, and the crown of the priesthood, and the crown of royalty and wealth, and above all, crown of reputation, due to the overwhelming amount of charity he donates to the poor and to the students in the rabbinical academy. Basically, he was a meyerdik, a person with fairness Torah on high levels. And this description actually is written after this controversy, a little later than 1513. But even already in those years, it's known he was the man, and he was a very, very prominent person. Now, and we know a lot about him. Now, just to mention one other nakuda about him, just to see, is the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Cairo in Orach Chaim has a quote, and where he's talking about Kriya Shema, saying Hashem Elokeichem Emes, if you say it again or not, and he brings down that there's a piece in the Sefer Apliya that says as follows: the Shliach Tzibur says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, again, at the end of Kriya Shema. And then he says as follows: someone was noyig like to say for Pliya. The garboy hanogid hagodol Reb Yitzchak HaKoyen Zal. He's referring to who? This Reb Yitzchak Shailul. Umayri harav hagodol Mari Yaakov Beirav. the Mari Beirav, who we also just mentioned. The Chol G'dayli Hadar Nimtza Beisahi, and other G'daylim from that time, Garabai Harava Gadol Rebelli Mizrahi, which we're also going to hear about in a second. The Chol G'dayli Hadar B'Misha Yinaik. So we see here how the Beis Yosef is referring to him as the Nugget Hagadol. We see also a count of this Ramosha Baslo. He was a big person. And from the Chuvas on this topic, it says clearly he was a Talmud Chacham. Now, who gets involved right away in the beginning? So there's as he said, so the Maribe Rav, who turns out is involved. He's in Mitzrayim at the time. He writes a tshuva where he says it's not a problem. There's a Shimshon. He doesn't have to worry about it. Who else writes a tshuva about it? So it turns out it's sent to the Mizrahi, one of the great Gedolim at the time. Somehow the kuntris of the heter, the Mizrahi, disagrees with the heter. At the same time, the tshuva gets to Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. It was a kuntris that there was a heter, and this controversy gets to Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. He disagrees. He also says it's Asr Gomer. Other people that throw in their 2 cents, Mari Beirav eventually is the Maral Bach, the Mabit, and others. And whatever came out in this sugya, the 2 approaches that came out amongst the Gedolim, sort of sets the precedent in many of the chuvas for that, as I said, is document of dozens of chuvas about the sugya. Anyway, this Rabbi Yitzchak, he dies in 1524, and there's a lot of articles about him. There's a one of the Hillel's, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel's sons, wrote a massive article about him in the Kapziel. This Avram David I mentioned earlier. We have takanas of his in Yerushalayim. Some of them are collected by this Moshe Basel in his back of his travels. He has a different takanas who made them. They were hung up in the shuls, different hanhagas akihila from this person. Also, there's Yidver Frumkin who wrote a lot about Yerushalayim, talks about him. Also, great Makairis about him. Okay, fine. So, but Kitzer, the point of the story is that this Yid was not Amaretz, and he said such a thing that he with Nazir Shimshon. But what happened? What was the story that I'm avoiding to say so far that he said something about Nazir Shimshon? It seems so in certain chuvas. This is always what's always very interesting about chuva literature. A lot of times one opens up a chuva and you see a story, and you could tell that there's much more to the story, and you're curious, and then you just see the chuva that the person writes. Then all of a sudden, somehow documents come to light, and it sheds light in the whole story, and then everything starts making sense. This is one such topic. Lamashal, in the Mizrahi, we find in the tshuva where he's talking about this thing, he says like this: Ma'isa sheneder Ruvain, v'amar hareini Nazir Shimshon, I'm going to be a Nazir Shimshon. Im Shimon Dayan, he basically didn't want Shimon to be the Dayan. So he says, if Shimon's going to end up being the Dayan on this Bezdin, I'm accepting myself a Nazir Shimshon. V'aisei Ruvain Nagid, he was a powerful person. V'yesh b'yadi chaylis l'mayah l'shim milois Dayan. And he has the power to stop him from being a Dayan. But then it turns out what happened. There was no one else to take over to be a proper Dayan, only this Shimon. So this Ruvain was stuck. And he needed Shimon to be the Dayan. So he's stuck because he said he was trying to show very strongly that he's not interested in him becoming the Dayan, and he's going to be a Nazir Shimshon if he is. And all of a sudden he's stuck. He needs him to go be a Dayan in this Bezdin. It sounds like a very strange story. Why is he using such lashonis? And it's, as I said, where is it coming from? And there's no good answer why. It turns out, who is this person? It's Rabbi Yitzchak Shiloh, the Nugget of Mitzrayim. There was a Bezdin, and for some reason, he got upset about something, and he did not want Pliny, who in this tshuva doesn't say his name, he doesn't want this person to be a dayan. But then it turns out they can't find a proper Roy Gadol to be the head of this Bezdin. So they're stuck. So now he's stuck with he's going to be a Nazir Shimshon. So they need to find a way that they could have the dayan that they want, that originally the Nugget didn't want to be on the Bezdin, and is there a way that he's not going to have to be a Nazir Shimshon? That's the story, and that's what they have to find. Okay, now turns out who's the dayan that this Rabbi Yitzchak Shaul doesn't want. Turns out it's the Mari Bey Rav. What? Now, who's the first person who writes the heter? Why? Rabbi Yitzchak Shaul does not have to worry about being a Nazir Shimshon. The Mari Bey Rav. Fascinating thing, what's going on over here? It seems, now, from all that we know, and the Mitrovsky is an expert on Mari Bey Rav, he's written a ton about it. Mari Bey Rav is one of the Gedolei Olam at the time already. He's younger at this time. In a moment, I'm going to give a description about him. But the Mari Bey Rav, says it's not a problem. Kinira, we don't know why. There was some type of fight that they had, and that triggered Rabbi Yitzchak Shlomo got upset. But right afterwards, not because that he found him the heter chas v'shalom, but basically they become shalom. Not only does it become shalom, the end of the story ends up being that because of this, he opens up a yeshiva in Yerushalayim, and it has a murdic effect. Dimitrovsky document. So clearly they became great friends again. But something was upset. He was upset at him, so he said he wanted to show his kayach, and he used a very strong lashon in a shvua, and he basically didn't want Rabbi Yaakov the Maribe Rav to be a dayan anymore. But then they realized there's no one to replace the Maribe Rav. Now you have to understand something. We have to back up a little. Who's the Maribe Rav?
Just to clarify for a second, I know you're building up the story.
No, Adarab. If I messed up already, it's better now.
Now, this story that Rabbi Yitzchak Shlomo says, I don't want the Maribe Rav to be a dayan on, that wasn't a Nazir Shimshon story. That's what was causing him to become a Nazir Shimshon?
Right, exactly. Yes, so it is important what you just said. It basically is, Rabbi Yitzchak Shlomo is so upset, so he says, he's making a shvua, I'm going to be Makai, I have to become a Nazir Shimshon if you don't listen to me. He's trying to use his power. And whoever the dayan is, and the tshuva doesn't say that it's the Maribe Rav, now we know it's the Maribe Rav. That's incredible.
So just clarifying, the story they had a fight about and ended up causing the Rabbi Yitzchak Shlomo to become a Nazir Shimshon was I wanted to be a dayan on a certain case, and therefore
it's not a certain case. It's not even a certain case. It sounds like what's based. Sorry, again, it's very important that you're pointing this out. Basically, like this, Maribe Rav, it seems what we know today was the dayan on the Bezdin. Okay, and he was one of the gedolim of the time. About to talk about it in a second. Now, something triggered that they got into a fight. So now that they're in a fight, we have to. So he wants him off the Bezdin, and he wants a replacement, a new Av Bezdin, let's say. So he was trying to show how much he's serious about it. I'm going to be another Shimshon, etc., etc. Now then they can't find anyone as good as the Maribe Rav. So now he needs him back. So Yitzchak Shlomo, if he needs him back, but then he's have to be a Nazir Shimshon, unless someone can find the heter of Nazir Shimshon. Who finds the heter? The guy that's thrown off the Bezdin, the Maribe Rav. They're cute. Anyway, this is all. Now, let's backtrack for a minute. Who is the Maribe Rav? So, again, the Maribe Rav is a person worthy of a massive arichos, one of the Gedolei Olim of the time. Just understand, the Beis Yosef and the Mabit, the two Gedolei Olim of the next generation, even after they're already Gedolim, means say they're big people, they learned by other people, the person that they both refer to as their main Rebbe or one of the people that influenced them is the Maribe Rav. In the famous controversy, which Amir Tzashem one day maybe we'll speak about, known as the Smicha controversy, the Maribe Rav is involved over here, and he wants to give Smicha to some of his Talmidim. Who are those Talmidim? The Talmidim are the Mabit and the Beis Yosef. So he's one of the superstar Gedolim of that time. He ends up having yeshiva after this story. He ends up opening a yeshiva in Yerushalayim, going back to Mitzrayim, back and forth. Anyway, eventually he opens up a yeshiva in Tzfas. That's where the Beis Yosef, as already a tremendous Talmud Chacham himself, goes to be in the spell from him. And the Mabit also, we're talking about they're already big people, and we're not talking about young Bachrim that went to sit at his feet to learn by him. We're talking about when they were already something. Anyway, Dimitrovsky documents this very well in his article about the chashivas of the Maribe Rav, but we're not going to go into that right now. Anyway, the point is that okay, so but what is clear is that although there was some type of fight, which we don't know what happened, but basically he needs him back to be the dayan, and that's the story why he has to get this thing. So they have to find the heter. Now, they find the heter. As I said, the Maribe Rav comes up with a heter, but not everyone agrees with it, starting with the Mizrahi, and as it seems the waves that it made, many people were not pro it. Okay. L'maisa, as I said, he goes to Yerushalayim, and eventually to Tzfas. That's the story. That's the end of the story as far as the Maribe Rav, Seif Yam of the Seif Yam of the Maribe Rav. Okay, but now let's just get very briefly what happens over here. So, basically, it sounds like this made a major tumult from the way the Mizrahi refers to it, and they brought the Gemara's in Nazir, and there was a big tumult, how to learn the sugyas properly, and different sugyas of Nazir all of a sudden become relevant. Now, how do we know what I'm saying, that this, or Dimitrovsky is claiming that the Mary Rav is this person? We know this from various things, but as even the Tshuva literature, as the different Tshuva literature comes out, the Maral Bach, who's the son of one of the Bar Pluktas of the people that was against the Heter that was found, he says, my father wrote a kuntris, and it was what was going on, it was against this kuntris. But it doesn't say that it was him. So it turns out that the Mary Rav wrote Chibur Rambam in the Ziris, and there he says it's clear it's him. And there's other ways how we know this. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty. Okay. Now, what happened over here? What was the makam for the heter that the rabbanim that were pro it or against it about it? So let's just do this very briefly. It seems that a heter could have been, which relates to Stam, the sugya of Masechnas Nadarim, which we spoke about, called Nidre. That really there's a Gemara in Nadarim that you're which is really the earlier origin of being mater neder. So it sounds like from a Radvaz in a different tshuva, which also happens to deal with tshuvas of Nazir Shimshon. And you have to understand, the Radvaz is also in this kufa. He has a few tshuvas about Nazir Shimshon, but he's also a younger, we say he's not as old as the Maribe Rav and Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv. He's a little younger, but he also knows about this story, and he also possibly offers his opinion on this topic, which we'll see shortly. So in a different tshuva, the Rabbaz was, it seems that someone came up, a threat to his wife, and he said, basically, I'm going to be a Nazir Shimshon, getting divorced, the whole tumult. And he throws in the sugyos of Rosh Hashanah, of that Gemara, that maybe, that's if you, that we know that you make a Tanai of Rosh Hashanah, all the Nadarim that I'm going to say this future year is not going to be Mekoyim. So maybe that will help for this thing. So maybe Ritzach Shailul, he didn't remember. He could use that Gemara. You say a much more original Tully in the whole sugya of Nadarim, but Lamaisa, this is not what's brought up over here at all. What is brought up? So if one turns, I'm not going to go through everything about this right now. It's very complex, but I do recommend as follows, and I'm going to say it in Mamish Rashi Prakim in 3 or 4 minutes, the whole story, and you'll see what I'm trying to do here. It's as follows. We have a Gemara. We have a Mishnah. Everything starts from a Mishnah. And a lot of times when you learn this Mishnah, if you ask anyone what's a Nazir Shimshon, they'll tell you, Mishnah, Daf Daled, and in Nazir. And the Mishnah basically says, Hareini Kishimshon. I'm like Shimshon. Then it says, Kiben Manayach, Kibal Delila, Kamisha Akar Dalseis Aza, Kamisha Neker Plishtim, as Einav Hareza Nazir Shimshon. So it says a bunch of things. If you say that, you're Nazir Shimshon. So the question is, what does someone have to say? If someone says, I'm a Nazir Shimshon, is that enough? Or does he have to be specific? Why? Because he could say, I'm Nazir Shimshon. Why do you think I'm talking about the story in Tanakh of the Nazir Shimshon, the famous Shimshon who was a Nazir? Maybe it's something else. So it has to be specific. And it's a tumul nifla in the Gemara. How do you understand this Gemara? In the Rishayim, whatever Mefarshim we have. And what's fascinating is, when you're looking at these chuvas, they're talking, they have the stuff that we have today. They had it then mostly in manuscript. They have the Rush, which we have today in the Shin Kubetzes, and this is before the Shin Kubetzes. They have some of the people calling Rashi on the side, which we discuss is not Rashi, they're calling him Rashi. Others are calling him Mefarish. They have Rabbeinu Baruch. They have an anonymous parish called Chedushay Nazir. They're struggling. We're talking about that Rabbi Yitzchak Shailul might end up having to be a Nazir Shimshon because of this if we don't come up with an Eitzah for him. So we're struggling. They're looking everywhere. How does one understand this Gemara? Is the Gemara saying that that if someone says it's not enough, he could say like this. He could say he's Kishimsha, he's a Nazir Kishimsha Ken Ben Manayach, and then he just has to add one of these things. He could either say Baal Delila, or he could say Sha'akadal says, or he could say Nekar Plishtim, because all three of these things were different things that automatically someone will know he's referring to Shimshon in Tanakh, who was a Nazir Shimshon. Anyway, there's also Rabbi Zriel, and they had all this. So the first person who writes about it is Maribe Rav, as I said, and he comes up with a heter. Now you have to understand, this heter is incredible. One sees his originality. He's stuck. He has the Gemaras. He's learning Gemaras, and there's nothing. And he uses a few sugyas and a few other things, and he comes up that it's mutter, that it's not Nazir Shimshon, why? Because he didn't use all the lashonos of this Mishnah, which is not so simple. That's obviously what everyone's talked about. Now, one of the problems, which we mentioned, is there's almost nothing on Nazir. What is there out there on Masechtas Nazir? There's a Rambam and basically the Smag. So that comes a key thing. You open up the Rambam, cryptic nifla, how to understand the Rambam. So they're handling how to understand the Rambam. So he comes up with a whole pshat. Seems to be a steer in the Rambam. Mamish, like the Yeshiva Shailim today, you have a Rambam, a steer, comes up with a whole creative mahalach how to do it, and it comes halacha lemaisa. He paskins that Rabbi Yitzchak Shail is not a Nazir Shimshon. Great. Okay. Problem is that not everyone agree with him already then. It gets out to the Mizrahi. The Mizrahi writes a 10, 12-page tshuva. Incredible to see, because a lot of times when you read a tshuva sefer, what happens is like this. You're learning the sefer, and you don't know the other sugyas. They could whip out a sugya from Timbuktu and another sugya from Timbuktu, because we're talking about the giants of the time. Here, it's all here. It's Nazir, Nadarim. You don't have to know anything else. You don't have to know Klolim from anywhere. You learn the sugyas. You just learn Tafyayim Nadarim Nazir. It's amazing Chazar to see, crystal clear. The language is easy to understand. I would love to spend the time to go through each thing. This would take hours. Anyway, Rabbi Yaakov Chagiv, in a Bakavdik Eifen, very sharp, says, what are you talking about? And in what's fascinating, obviously, one of the things that I find fascinating, who is Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv? So you have to understand, Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv is famous for being the author of the Ein Yankov. He's older than the Maribe Rav, also tremendous gadol at the time. All these people, a lot of them were survivors of the Dar Gerish, of the Gerish Svar. They're the Gerish Svar. They were the people thrown out. Their stories are, each one is more interesting than the next. Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaviv has a son, the Maral Bach, also a key player in this sugya. Also, he's the famous loichem with the Maribe Rav and the Smicha controversy. So now, and he gets involved in this topic. So we have Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv writes a massive tshuva. He says, it came to me, the story, and he writes that it's pashut, terrible. It's not a heter. There's no heter under the sun. And interestingly enough, what does he say? He's tracking down Svarim. They're looking to see, maybe we could find the Limud Chos. And he's getting a few copies of the Smag to make sure the Lashon is correct. Then he's getting manuscripts of the Gemara, and he's trying to find the Rambam's Pirish. And it's interesting, the Rambam's Punktir, the Rambam doesn't say anything in Pirish Mishnayos, which would maybe help. And then he says he luckily got a Pirish from Rabbeinu Peretz HaKayin, and he uses that. And then each thing, obviously is more fascinating than next to someone like me. And even though there's no svarim, then he says at one point, I get a Gemara ksuvis miklaf mizman kadmoin, and in this Gemara is Masechtas Nazir, and it says, because they're basically trying to figure out every single thing, because there's a dion, and if you open up your Gemara over here, you'll see right away you struggle how to read the Girsus, is what's going on in the story, and you see right away the Rishainim that these Paiskim had. Anyway, he turns up with the Rambam, and he has a murdik interesting mahalach to explain how the Rambam is not how the Maribe Rav came out, and it's a problem. It's a very big problem. Now, we don't know, as much as we know that a lot of people wrote about this topic, we don't know what was Rabbi Yitzchak Shail's reaction and what was the reaction when all of a sudden opposition came in. Mizrahi's against it. Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaviv is against it. For example, the material of Rabbi Chaviv is only printed in the 1990s. So, but we know then that they knew about it. How do we know? Because the different Gedolim quoted. Anyway, just to throw out there, if one learns the Lamashal and the Sugis and the Darim and Daftal, the Keren Darich Meisha, the Taisis Yontif handling it, they're all struggling with this thing. Interestingly enough, there's a fascinating Meiri, has a whole different Mahalach in this Gemara. Now, what's interesting is the Netziv uses the Meiri over here. Contrary, this is tying into our Chaim Kanievsky Shiurim. The Ar Sameach says, what do you mean? He doesn't even understand what's anyone talking about. There's a Pashto Rai from the Yerushalmi that he's a Nazir. As Isaac, the Meiri turns, as Isaac Rameir Simcha the Chedushim on Shas. And if you look into the Tosefta says the same as the Yerushalmi. Interestingly enough, I did not find in the Chuvas that are talking about Tosefta Yerushalmi. And we know they weren't so Isaac. Many of the people, at least in that period of time, were not so Isaac in Tosefta Yerushalmi. They barely had copies of it. Anyway, bottom line is that these were the two great Gedolim. So it's basically a big machlokes. Just to finish up over here, it's as follows. Okay, second. Okay, the Mabit was also, as I said, Talmud Maribe Rav. So the Mabit, he has a shaila. Someone basically was a Nazir. He came to Eretz Yisrael because he figured he can't be a Nazir elsewhere, and he wants up as a heter. So again, this Rambam somehow comes into. He was being a Nazir Shimshon, And it seems that they was trying to find somehow a heter. The Mabit, I think, does end up coming up with a heter. Kinireh, he's going based on the Mahalach of who? The Mari Beirav, who we said is his Rebbe. Okay. The Maral Bach talks about a Yid, the Maral Bach, who his father is, Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaviv, who's against the heter. Lamaisa, seems there was someone that was Noider Nazir Shimshon, and he did not say Shimshon ben Manoach. And he said Shimshon. He just said Shimshon Levad. And he doesn't know about the whole chumrah of Nazir Shimshon. He just thought it's like a stam shavua ba'alma, which is clear what happened, that once it became like a catchphrase, a lot of the people didn't know what they were saying. So anyway, here he says it's not a problem, because the guy Pasha didn't know what he was saying. Okay, that's great. But that was that story. Anyway, turns out many more Gedolim get involved. Rabbi Yosef Taichik, who's he? So he was someone, Magam Meisharm, the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef refers to him very highly. Just this week, Havat Shalom just put out a beautiful edition, including new manuscripts of the Magam Meisharm, and you can see in there how he's referred to by the Malach of the Beis Yosef. Anyway, Meir Ben Yo has collected some of his materials, and recently even more stuff of his have been attributed to him, somewhat wrongly, some rightfully, and he's a key player. He also has a tshuva about it. He learns B'chavrusa with the Maral Bach, so you can imagine which side he might end up taking. Now, okay, just a few months ago, a work came out from the Stolen Rebbe's library. Reb Shlomo Baruch, also from this Kufa, Ben Daira of the Beis Yosef and everything. He has at least 2 tshuvas about it, where he also talked.
Is this all taking place at the time of the discussion? This is not the discussion, a Talmudic discussion later on, right? These whatever you're saying till now is happening at the time.
Excellent point, very important point. Rabbi Yosef Taichik is at the same time. And this Ksavia of Shlomo Baruch is a drop later. But it's the impact of what was happening. He saw the psak of Rabbi Yosef Taichik, and he's reacting to that. And then the next tshuva in his sefer, he also was asked about a shayla of Nazir Shimshon. So you see, it's on one hand they're dealing with the actual thing. Rabbi Yosef Taichik Lamashal is dealing with the same story with the Mari Beirav verse the Mari Beirav verse Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaviv, but some of them, it's the outcome of it. I'm just not giving the exact dates for everyone. Okay, now, and just to conclude,
part of your story, going to discuss how Rabbi Tzachel himself accepted or what he did.
So I don't know. It's fascinating. We know so much, and we know so much about. What did he say about the psak? What we do know is that he ends up remaining a keeper. We don't know that he's a Nazir, so I guess that he went with the psak of. That it's heter, and it's clear from the tshuvas that they know that he's a tremendous Talmud Chacham and Yer Shemayim. Also, they throw out these lashonos there. Anyway, there's a tshuva from the Radvaz. So this tshuva, so again, the Radvaz wrote prolific, and he had arichas yamim, and the Radvaz's his period of time is also this time period. Now he writes a tshuva, but it's not clear if it's him. They found the tshuva. So Rabbi Yitzchak Yeshai Weiss is convinced it's the Radvaz. Professor Hevlin and others, they're convinced it's another Yid from this time, Reb Shmuel ben Chakkai. But the bottom line is they try to do computer identification, which is ways of how to identify based on very sophisticated computer technology, but they're not able to confirm. But bottom line is it's one of these Chashav Gedolim. Anyway, fine. One last new Maramakim about it, and then we'll conclude. Is Azai. There's another tshuva sefer. It also came out this year, Reb David ben Shushan, and this seems to be also the time of the Beis Yosef. Another manuscript. This guy has this gadol has a massive tshuva on the Sugi of Nazir Shimshon. He starts out his tshuva. Someone brought up a whole story to him about a whole case in Nazir Shimshon. It seems to be a whole fight. Whole page about what the fight was. But then he goes like this. So it's interesting. He's referring to about the story everyone knows about. He says like this. So it seems like basically the Chachamim of Mitzrayim agreed with the Meri Beirav, and with Stama, I would guess that Yitzchak Shailo went up in that. Kula maskim v'sharish zev. V'divish name halayim sum al sefer trus aram simenon. V'nem kol roitzi yom misham. Kima etzig lahatik svarmanim tzolaitzim koladim. I'm not going to be matik them. Then he says like this: B'dar haba achareim kasam erim Avram Yerushalmi Chuvais Rabbis Nazir Shimshon. And then he talks about v'nechel kol alav Reb Shlomo Chakin Alevi, which I just quoted, which is a whole deal if that's the Ravas. Now, the last idea of this thing This Rabbi Avram Yerushalmi, also Ben Dair of the Beis Yosef, he says like this. He's asked the Shaila about Nazir Shimshon. You got to hear his quote. He says like this. He named me leflim. Previously, kasafti kama tshuves bedavar zeh. Vayreiti heter lanoshim rabim. Shaitzi nidram beloshin zeh mishum davar loshin shvuben eder doloi mahani the das kam gedolim vaydati sheish nesmoich aleim, and he gave a whole heter. Basically, I'm not interested anymore. I've been giving a terim about this sugya. I mean, to say that it came up so many times. So this is also another manuscript that was discovered. So it's not only that there's manuscripts that exist and everything. They're constantly finding more how far this concept was. Anyway, I don't know what it is, but they say there's some type of thing. Sometimes an expression creeps in for whatever the expression is, and then everyone starts using it. And it's clear from the different people that are using it that a lot of them, they had no clue what in the world they were saying. I'm just going to find one other quote and then conclude. If I can find the quote, hold on. Lucky I cannot. Okay, so just to conclude as follows, I can't find that last quote, so we'll have to live without it. Hold on, I'll just find this. Basically, what the maskana is like this. All of a sudden, something that didn't happen in the times of the Rishonim was never no precedent. Somehow in the 1500s, it becomes precedent. And then originally I was going to say that maybe Ritzak Shaila, once he did it and it got so much, the Maratzim started using that lashon in their speech without having any idea what they were doing. It means the case perhaps became so famous. Everyone was tumbling about it. So the Rabbanim were tumbling about it. They were tumbling the Sugis in Nazir and the Darim. The Amayram, they had no idea. They knew maybe what Nazir Shimshon is, so they started using it as a sprach because they saw that it could possibly be taken whatever, and there were certain Gedolim that were us, so they used it as a sort of a threat. Anyway, you see from this a theme that comes out when you learn Mesechnos Nadarim and Mesechnos Nazir, the koyach of the dibur, how Chazal analyzed everything. When someone said something, you had to mean what you said, and then they would analyze it to death. And this is what the sugyas are. A guy says something, what does he mean? And this is what happened over here. Rabbi Yitzchak Shaul said something, and then it was analyzed what it meant. And Lamaisa, it's spawned dozens of tshuvas about it. And this is, again, one more famous thing of this Rabbi Yitzchak Shaul that's out there. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Perhaps we could get something on Rabbi Yitzchak Shaul himself one day and all the other characters that you mentioned in this episode. So looking forward to the upcoming episodes on Saita and Keshel Elio. Again, we always are open to sponsorships for these episodes, and other topics are available as well. Please be in touch with myself and or Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut, and of course you can be in touch with him with comments, suggestions, and some of the PDF materials that he mentioned.